Hi everyone, Michael Smith here. In my earlier number crunching career as an engineer and statistician, I often encountered what are called irrational numbers. These are those infinitely non-repeating decimal numbers such as pi, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter, phi, the golden ratio of fractal self-similarity in nature, and e, the base of natural logarithms, also called Euler's number. Because these are such important constants in math, science, and finance, I just accepted their irrationality without question. However, my later interest in numerology, the idea of numbers having energetic meanings, but only as rational whole numbers, prompted me to revisit these cryptic irrational numbers to find some deeper rationale to them. In this video, we're going to explore one of these constants, the golden ratio phi, which equals the irrational number 1.6180339, etc., etc. One thing we can say about nature is that it's inherently very efficient, always expending the least amount of energy to create and support anything, including life. Indeed, the law of conservation of energy guarantees it. That energy itself is never wasted, but always transferred or transformed into something else. Phi, also known as the golden ratio, is nature's underlying pattern of that efficiency, of efficient growth and consistency of form from one generation or cycle to the next. As such, phi describes the self-similar or fractal way that natural systems retain their defining characteristics with each iteration, essentially of the energy invested into evolution being conserved. We see this in the staggered pattern of branches, stems, leaves, and petals for maximum exposure to the sun and structural symmetry around a central stalk, the spiral pattern of pine cone and sunflower seeds for maximum pack density, the spiral growth of nautilus shells, hurricanes, and galaxies, and the relative lengths and proportions of our limbs, such as arm to forearm, hand, and our finger joints, and even the dimensions of DNA. And last but not least, the physical traits we inherit from our parents and their parents before them. Considered sacred as the divine proportion, phi has been incorporated into art, architecture, and even music since ancient times. In the pyramids in Egypt, the Greek Parthenon, Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, the Taj Mahal in India, and many sculptures and paintings, including those by Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Salvador Dali. Pieces composed by Mozart and Beethoven are believed to feature this ratio as well. Two quantities are said to be in golden ratio to each other if their ratio is the same as the ratio of their sum to the larger of the two quantities. Perhaps the simplest way to picture this is by two lines of lengths A and B, as shown here by the orange and green arrows. These are in golden ratio if the length of orange arrow A to green arrow B is in the same ratio as that of A plus B combined, the blue arrow to orange arrow A. Conceptually, this can be described by the expression phi equals A plus B over A equals A over B, or more simply, child is to parent as parent is to grandparent. And mathematically, phi equals 1 plus root 5 over 2, which equals the irrational, non-repeating decimal number 1.6180339, etc. As we will see shortly, this mathematical result is derived by what's called the Fibonacci series. But before we get into the details, let's look at the geometry of the golden ratio itself, as it is through geometry of physical form that the golden ratio is most clearly revealed in nature and most beautifully expressed. The golden ratio phi emerges in a variety of geometric forms, from lines, as we just covered, to rectangles, circles, and triangles. In the case of lines, it's reflected in their relative lengths. For a rectangle, its width relative to height. For a segmented circle, its two rotational angles. And for a triangle, its long side relative to its shorter side. As we can see, these all essentially represent the same thing, the relationship between the two quantities which define each shape in the simplest, most efficient way. As such, it is this defining relationship or ratio which is passed on from one generation to the next to retain its shape. And because each generation shares a length, side, or angle from the one before, each parent as an orange shape is literally contained within the blue geometry of its child, just as each grandparent in green is embodied within its parent in orange. This multi-generational nesting of shapes within shapes, and necessarily rotating as they go in order to fit, creates a further geometric trademark of the golden ratio, that of a spiral. Again, manifesting in such things as the spiral arrangement of sunflower seeds, petals and leaves, or the spiral shape of hurricanes and galaxies. But in all cases, it's the fundamental golden ratio of child to parent that's constantly working behind the scenes, and it's through the Fibonacci series that the golden ratio comes to life. The Fibonacci series through which the golden ratio emerges is that same child-to-parent ratio expressed over many generations, but simply in terms of whole numbers instead of geometric shapes. As there can be infinitely many such future generations, the Fibonacci series is likewise an infinite series of related numbers. The Fibonacci series is named after the 12th century Italian mathematician Leonardo Bonacci, also known as Leonardo Fibonacci, who introduced the principle to 12th century Europe, although it was recognized earlier in India. So, beginning from 0 as the first whole number or parent, and 1 as its child, so to speak, the next generation is given by their sum of 0 plus 1 equals 1. Then we add that sum to the previous number of 1 to get 1 plus 1 equals 2. Next, 1 plus 2 equals 3, 2 plus 3 equals 5, 3 plus 5 equals 8, and so on. This creates an ongoing series of 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, etc., in which the ratio of each new generation to the one before gives a closer and closer approximation to the golden ratio's true value of 1.6180339, etc. Again, being an irrational number with infinitely many decimal places, the Fibonacci series never actually gets to its true precise value. But as we can see, even after only the first 6 generations or so, we get pretty close with a value of 1.615. Nevertheless, in the most fundamental terms, the golden ratio and its Fibonacci series simply represent the 2-to-1 ratio of second generation to first, of child to parent, perhaps the most important relationship of all in nature. So, although the golden ratio is indeed an irrational number when we view numbers as physical quantities, it actually becomes rational once we look at their relationship to each other. This same duality, I suspect, applies to all seemingly irrational constants of nature, such as pi, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. Although pi equals the irrational number 3.14159, etc. in physical terms, it fundamentally represents the rational 2-to-1 ratio of 2 pi radians per cycle, or simply 2 polarized half cycles per cycle, which is explained in a separate video. This broader perspective of numbers as having simple conceptual meanings and rational energetic relationships is in fact the basis of numerology. As such, let's now use numerology to explore the golden ratio more deeply. So, from the geometry and mathematics of the golden ratio, we now move on to its numerology. Again, the idea of numbers having energetic meanings, as well as words based on the numerical position of their letters in the alphabet. Although there's a variety of numerology systems developed over the ages, I'm going to focus on the 2 I'm most familiar with. The traditional base 10 Pythagorean system developed by Pythagoras of ancient Greece, and my own base 12 adaptation of that system, where the base 10 or decimal system gives meanings to the numbers from 0 to 9, the base 12 approach gives meanings to 0 through 11, covered in more detail in another video. Let's begin by examining the base 10 numerology of the Fibonacci series. Here I've listed in blue the first 30 numbers of that series, again with each number being the sum of the 2 before. Now, although the numbers in the Fibonacci series itself never repeat, a repeating pattern does emerge when we use base 10 numerology to reduce each number to its fundamental single-digit energy, reducing simply meaning adding multiple digits to get a single digit. Because the first 6 numbers, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8 are already single digits, they remain the same in numerology. Then 13 would reduce to 1 plus 3 equals 4, 21 to 2 plus 1 equals 3, 34 to 3 plus 4 equals 7, and so on. What we find is that the series repeats every 24 numbers, as shown underlined in light green. So, to find the numerology of those 24 numbers, we likewise add them together until we reduce them to a single-digit sum. Because the initial sum of 117 is not yet a single digit, we reduce it once again to get 1 plus 1 plus 7 equals 9, which is the energy of completion in numerology. What this essentially means is that in base 10 numerology, the Fibonacci series energetically represents repeating cycles or generations of completion, which makes total sense. Now, as I mentioned, numerology applies not only to numbers, but also words. So, to get the numerology of the word Fibonacci, we add together the numerical positions of each of the letters, which gives a sum of 44. Whenever a twin number like this shows up in numerology, it's called a master number, and is not typically reduced further. A master number basically represents the idea of mastering a higher octave of its single-digit theme. So here, master number 44 means mastery of the 4 theme of structure. Again, mastery of structure is precisely what the Fibonacci series represents, of conserving and refining physical traits from one generation to the next. Let's now see how base 12 numerology compares with base 10, again for the Fibonacci series as a number sequence, and for the word Fibonacci itself. Once again, starting with the first 30 numbers of the series in blue, we this time reduce each number to its single digit in base 12, rather than base 10. As before, the first 6 numbers, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, are already single digits, so they again remain unchanged. Then 13 would reduce to 112 plus a remainder of 1, or 11 in base 12, which further reduces to 1 plus 1 equals 2. Now note that although the double digit 11 is a master number which isn't reduced further when it appears in someone's chart as a final number, it is reduced when it appears within a mathematical calculation such as this. Next, 21 reduces to 112 plus 9, or 19, which further reduces to 1 plus 9 equals the single digit 10 in base 12, and so on. What we find this time around is that the series repeats once again, but instead of repeating every 24 numbers as in base 10, it repeats every 10 numbers in base 12, shown underlined in orange. Next, adding those 10 numbers together, we get a sum of 38 in base 12, that is 3 12s plus 8 remainder, which further reduces to 3 plus 8 equals 11, 11 being a single digit in base 12. Whenever the final single digit comes from the sum of 2 digits before, such as here, those 2 digits are important in numerology. They're considered the inner energies through which the final outer single digit energy is achieved. So here, the 11 energy of illumination is being achieved through the 3 of the catalyst and the 8 of manifestation. So, through the lens of base 12 numerology, the Fibonacci series once again represents a repeating cycle of generations, but instead of just physical completion of the 9 energy as in base 10, they represent cycles of illumination and learning of the 11 energy in base 12, and specifically through the catalyst of manifestation, through the 3 and the 8. As such, base 12 gives a more in-depth interpretation of the Fibonacci series as a never-ending process of evolution and learning in which each manifestation cycle is a catalyst for the next. As for the numerology of the word Fibonacci in base 12, interestingly, we get the very same energy of 3811 as that of the series itself. This energetic consistency between numbers and words seems to show up more in base 12 than base 10 in my experience, as do more precise meanings in general, which is one of the many reasons I prefer the base 12 approach. Before we wrap up, let's also take a look at the numerology of the word phi, seeing as it represents the golden ratio itself. And again, we will compare base 10 and base 12 back to back. In base 10, The letters of the word Phi resonates with 7 plus 8 plus 9 equals the 24/6 energy of love through the duality of structure, which aligns nicely with the idea of the golden ratio as a divine or harmonizing proportion of structure. Likewise, in base 12, Phi resonates with the 20/2 energy of duality through the duality of potential. In other words, as a partnership and sharing of potential from one generation to the next. So, once again, both base 10 and base 12 give fitting interpretations for what Phi represents, just from slightly different angles. The irrational versus rational duality we've been exploring here through the golden ratio, I believe extends to our physical spiritual duality too. Like the golden ratio of learning from parent to child, it takes many iterations of seemingly irrational experiences and unpredictable contrast in order to converge in on what seems to be the simple, rational truth beneath it all, that it is through contrast, polarity, and free choice that we achieve wholeness, that through duality we achieve unity, that through the two we become one. So, the next time you're out in nature, I invite you to look closely at the amazing complexity and diversity, while at the same time stepping back to appreciate the fractal patterns, geometric relationships, and simple themes which repeat through everything. There truly is simplicity within the complexity, and rationale to the irrationality, including us. And like the golden ratio, this means honoring your past in the present and sharing the best of both forward. Thanks so much for watching.